Death walked the streets, as overcast skies looked down upon the blood pooling amongst the cobblestones on that late summer night. Perhaps a soft humming or the snick of a blade slicing flesh was the last thing she'd heard as August 31st, 1888 began a season of terror that would teach London the name, Jack the Ripper. The drums beat, and blood runs red as the skull is taken from the human vessel to be set in a place of honor. Skulls have always been revered, imparting knowledge to a simpler being since earliest man first walked the earth. But time and culture have passed him by, and the stories faded until now, and the skulls can wait no longer. They have risen, and it is time once again. And I, the Skull Keeper, listen as they tell me of macabre tales, ancient knowledge, and wisdom, so that once again it may be passed to you in Tales from the Night. Welcome to the first show of Tales from the Night. I am the Skull Keeper, your host. Some of you may know me from the YouTube show of the same name. If not, then welcome. Now stop driving and turn up your volume as I tell you stories the skulls tell me. I just remembered, a very important anniversary has almost passed, and my skulls have reminded me that I should delve into the past. So reach back to August 31st, 1888, 133 years ago, and learn about the Ripper, Jack the Ripper. Now, contact with the 133-year-old skull takes some time, and this is her reflection on thoughts and occurrences of that time. No one but the killer and his victims know for sure what they thought or did. Late summer into the fall of that year, a man or woman filled the streets of Whitechapel with fear. 5 women, low-class women, prostitutes, murdered and left as garbage in the back alleys of London Whitechapel district. Let's take a look at their murders and you come up to your own conclusions of who did it. Jack the Ripper started on his journey of murder between 1888 and 1891, killing 11, but only credited with the conical 5. Conical meaning, in similar ways, that only the 5 showed to be related by the same method. Who were the poor victims? Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. All 5 were believed murdered by the same hand between August 31st and November 9th of 1888. Closure of their stories may never happen, given that 133 years and the degrading of the physical evidence have occurred. New methods of DNA testing have been developed, and testing resulting in a match. Who do you think it is? By the spring of 1888, an influx of Irish, Jews, and other Eastern Europeans had swollen London's East End to the bursting point. 8,500 people sought the boarding houses each night in the Lower East Side for a safe, dry place to survive another night. Crowding, liquor, poverty, and the harsh living of the times led to overpopulation and a lack of work, causing them to turn to crime or prostitution to keep them alive. The first murder, Friday 31st, August 1888. The bells over Whitechapel pealed twice, their sonorous notes floating upon the cold night air, as women plied their trade to the dark streets. 2 pence only, 2 pence, she called. Surely one more bloke will come along and have 2 pence, and then I can get off my feet and into a dry bed for the rest of the night, she thought. Crossing the alley, she spotted a man. She hobbled, pain having numbed her feet from the high-buttoned shoes and the hours of standing waiting for the men to pick her above others that had wares to sell. "Hello, love, do you fancy a roll?" Mary Ann Nichols asked. The man shook his head as he brushed past her, his face averted as he rushed to get home. Perhaps far away she heard the chiming of the half hour and worried if she would find a safe corner to curl up in. When out of the night footsteps came toward her. A man in fine dress stepped out of the darkness and approached her. Her smile grew as the gentleman reached out to her, pulling her hand onto his arm as he led her toward the dark. 2:40 a.m., and her feet would be warm soon, but not for long. Pressing her against the building doors, he towered over her. "Love, let's pull up these skirts," she said as he pressed her and said not a word. "2 pence, love," she said as she tried to push him off. She wasn't worried, not then she wasn't. She had this happen before. His breath ragged and hot stroked her neck as his hand fastened in her dress. Pushing, she tried to look into his face. It was a leering animal's face, and fear trickled into her heart. Her fear bloomed into a strangled scream as the sound of steel on leather caught her ear. Pushing on him, his hand over her mouth, she felt the first cut as it sliced across her neck. Her legs went loose as he ripped the blade across her stomach and jabbed her on the right side as she slid down the doors to crumple on the ground. The pain in her stomach caused her to sit up, but he pushed her back and slit her throat all the way to the vertebrae. Darkness swallowed the killer, leaving the woman to be found at 3:40 a.m. by Mrs. Emily Holland, a woman she had previously shared a bed with. Saturday, September 8th, 1888. Annie Chapman stood before 29 Hanbury Street. The light rain had stopped, and she had pulled her shawl tighter as she stood in the 40-degree weather at 5:30 in the morning. The sun, just coloring the sky to the east, did not yet touch the dirty gutters she walked upon. Elizabeth Long stood nearby, watching the street, wishing for a man to come along. Footsteps sounded, and she nodded at Chapman as a man came up the street approaching them. Two, which to pick, he thought, as he slid his hands into his coat pockets. The bone handle of the knife in his pocket warmed, bringing a surge of power as the man slowly walked toward the two, his eyes moving between them until he'd made his decision. Annie straightened and thrust out a hip as the man walked toward her. Elizabeth Long stared at the man dressed in a shabby genteel manner, his dark overcoat and brown deerstalker hat making her wish she'd been picked. Yes, she'll do, he thought as he took out a hand and stroked his curled mustache and said, "Good morning, my dear." His look appealed to Annie, and as he leaned toward her and asked, "Will you?" she replied, "Yes." Long heard this and, disappointed, turned and wandered away as Chapman led the gentleman through the door leading to her fate. Taking her by the hand, Jack smiled as he ushered her into the darkness of the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, knowing that the enclosed yard would afford him the leisure to take his time and make a proper go of his night's work. Touching her face, rubbing the back of his hand softly over her cheek, he whispered to her until she tilted her head back to laugh. His blade slipped across the exposed skin as he slapped his hand over her mouth. Not a sound was heard, but his heavy breathing as the blade slid through her neck again. Huffing, sweat dripped from the man's face, dropping upon Annie's as he carried her to the steps and laid her on the ground. The police were called at 6 a.m. to view the body of a woman lying by the steps leading to the backyard where she had been murdered. Upon canvassing the area, Elizabeth Long was questioned and revealed a description of a dark-haired man dressed in dark overcoat, deerstalker hat. A gentleman. Now, was she posed so he could watch as the police went about the business of caring for the dead? You decide. Inspector, "Had you ever seen the like?" the bobby said as he looked at the body. Her throat was severed by 2 deep cuts, the abdomen open with a section of the skin placed on her left shoulder. Another section plus her small intestine placed on her right shoulder. Unbeknownst to the officers, her uterus, vagina, and parts of her bladder had also been removed. Jack must have felt a thrill at having the time to explore his work without someone walking by. Oh, what glory darkness is when humans are on the hunt. September 27th, 1888. A letter arrives at the Central News Agency. Is it a hoax or is it real? You decide. The letter is addressed to Dear Boss. It reads, Dear Boss, I keep on hearing that the police have caught me, but they won't fix me yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them until I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. The next job I do, I shall clip the ladies' ears off and send them to the police officers, just for a jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp. I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands, curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. It seems this was the first use of a name the killer gave himself. Sunday, the 30th of September. It had rained until midnight on the 29th, washing the grime from the streets of Whitechapel, as Elizabeth Stride took her last steps in this life. The tolling of the bells across London rang 1 a.m. as a body lay in Dutfield's yard off Burner Street. The cry goes out, whistles from the bobbies blast a shrill call for help. Oh, Lord, the young bobby said as he came into the yard, locating a shape on the ground. Lowering his lantern, the pale yellow light plays over the form of a local lady. Her neck is marked by a single 6-inch clean slash, a cut that will be determined to have cut her left carotid artery and trachea before ending beneath her right jaw. Was this the work of the Ripper? Was he interrupted? Was he left-handed or right? Facing her or held her from behind? Perhaps they couldn't tell. Why was she slashed only once? You decide. Witnesses were found, but as today, every person sees a scene differently at the same time. Fair hair, dark hair, short, tall, shabbily dressed or dressed to the nines. Could they have seen her on the evening of the 29th into the 30th? With several different men before she met Jack. Footfalls bounced from the walls as the figure hurried along. Footfalls bounced from the walls as the figure hurried along. Brick skinned his palm as he touched a building here, a wall there, and his breath came ragged and sour, like the copper smell on the blade. Sweat itched along his ribs, his face a mask of rage as the cloaked figure raced along the dark streets, his head swiveling as he looked for another. Why did that man have to come then? Why? Mitre Square, his snarling mask smoothed into its proper countenance as he spied a lone woman. Mitre Square, City of London. The sound of footfalls echoed as 3 men walked through the square and noticed a woman and man in conversation. The 2 laughed, and they passed on leaving them to the night. The air, fresh from the clearing rain, would soon hold the electricity of fresh violence and the coppery taint of blood spilt. Catherine Eddowes lay spread out on her back, her legs akimbo, her wares on display as the whistle sounded to call for the second time that morning. 3/4 of an hour had passed from the time of the first discovery, and now the work of the Ripper was revealed. The police didn't panic, didn't rush out looking for the killer. They only scoured the area for witnesses because they knew the killer had gotten away again. Now, dear friends, I could tell you in every gory detail the horrific wounds inflicted upon the poor woman. But if you are so bloodthirsty, I suggest you research it yourself. I will tell you that he took at least 5 minutes to complete his work. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't hide a single bloody slash from you. Our poor Catherine had her throat severed. Her right shoulder, now the home of her intestines, placed there after the Ripper had slit her abdomen with a long, deep gash. Unless you were willing to dip a hand, you wouldn't learn till later that the left kidney and part of her uterus were removed. I wonder if 7-year-old Picasso ever met the Ripper. He surely learned that crazy artwork somewhere. The Ripper had gone to work on the woman's face, cutting off her nose, slicing her cheek and eyelids, before he incised a curious set of triangle markings on her cheeks, perhaps a Masonic clue. He didn't fulfill his boast of taking the ears, but he did leave a section of her right ear in her clothing. Half an ear is better than none. Ooh, my skulls tell me that you shuddered with that in bad taste. Darkness, deep black shadows, split by the few pools of light from the gas lamplight, still hid anyone willing to stand and watch, to enjoy, if they wished to see their work acknowledged. The pounding was loud upon the wooden doors in the neighborhood that night. My hands hurt from this knocking on doors, said the young Bobby to his partner. I wish this bloody bastard was in the goal now. Then maybe we could have a bit of a rest, he replied, as they saw a man approaching. What's your name, sir? Lewend, Joseph Lewend, the man said as the officer stopped him. They looked him up and down. His clothing, though rumpled, were free of blood. Have you been out by Mitre Square this evening? Why, I walked through there a little after 1. Were you alone? Did you see anyone there? They asked, getting the queer feeling that they may have gotten lucky. I was with my friends. We saw a man and woman. Why? Come with us, sir. The wind blanched as the officer sent the pale yellow light across the body. Is this the woman you saw, sir? I can't be certain, but it may be, he said, turning and walking a pace away. A deep shuddering breath, and he told what he had seen. A fair-haired man, dressed shabbily as he was with that woman, I think. Maybe my friends got a better look. History may have recorded their statements somewhere. And as a retired detective, I would be surprised if they hadn't. The skull hasn't gotten their names, but feels that they didn't agree with Joseph on the description. Witnesses. Rats ran along the building fronts in the cramped streets of Whitechapel as the police roamed looking for a 2-legged wolf. What's that, do you think? P.C. Alfred Long murmured to his partner as they prowled the Wentworth model dwellings on Goulston Street. Looks like a bit of cloth, he continued. In the archway lay a blood-stained apron. The time is 2:55 a.m. Above the apron, upon the wall by an open door, at number 108 to 119, a message written in chalk, which they read as, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." D.C. Halse corrected his spelling to Juwes. This correction was noted in Long's notebook. D.C. Halse's version stated, "The Jews are not the men that will be blamed for nothing." This was shown to Police Commissioner Charles Warren, who feared reprisals leading to anti-Semitic riots. He ordered it washed away. This was done by 5:30 that same morning. Although the writing was found near the apron, it is unclear if the Ripper wrote it based on the graffito of the same vein common at that time. Early on the morning of October 1st, 1888, a postcard with red stains arrives at the Central News Agency. This one bears similar writing to the boss letter and is treated as real. It read, "I was not codding, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number one squealed a bit, couldn't finish straight off. Not the time to get ears for police. Thanks for keeping the last letter back till I got to work again." The newspapers wrote, fear ruled, and they fanned the flames to sell papers in London town. How many people in Whitechapel could spare the price of a paper? Ask yourself. How many women could afford to give in to the fear and not earn that bed money? Humans will forego any threat to get comfort and safety. Why didn't the innkeepers and landlords do something? Can you say what you would have done? Many letters were sent and published, but none were credible until a letter and a present were to come on the 16th of October, 1888. A letter arrived to George Lusk, the leader of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, in a handwriting style unlike that of the boss letter or the Jackie postcard. Along with this letter was, well, what have we here? Strong fingers opened the letter, scanned the prose. It said from hell, "Mr. Lusk, sore. I send you half the kidney I took from one woman and preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer." It was signed, "Catch me if you can, Mr. Lusk." His hands trembled. A sweat beaded on the poor man's brow as he reached down and opened the small box. Imagine, the smell alone must have been appalling, but the sight of half a kidney would have been enough to make the strongest of us gag. Whose was it? Upon clinical testing, it was found to be a left kidney, the very same as Catherine Eddowes was missing. But if it was hers, it's inconclusive. Perhaps, had it survived with her tissue, modern forensics could have said. Twitching the curtain aside, hands red with blood staining the fabric, two eyes looked into the shadows of the street, closing the door as he walked away. Men started to work past him, never knowing that his clothing removed before his work had begun, covered the girl's dried blood upon his body. Friday, November 9th, 1888, 10:45 a.m. The rooming house at 13 Miller's Court rested from the morning's departures. But one room was very quiet indeed. Mary Jane Kelly had suffered in life and found no respite in death. Blood dripped from the bed in the corner of the room, the nightstand holding pieces of flesh, the carcass on the bed only human in the sense that it was two-legged and had two arms. Mary Jane Kelly looked nothing like a human after Ripper had finished his night of destruction. Her face had been hacked beyond recognition, flayed, her throat severed to the spine, her abdomen gutted of all her organs to be used as a pillow and foot warmer. Now, dear friends, most don't know, but a fetus was placed between her legs, or so I have been told, and read in different accounts. Some pictures taken at the time show it, some don't. You decide if this is the basis of the rumor that the Duke of Clarence and Avondale was involved. Did the royal family commission this? You decide. Oh, by the way, her heart was never found. Perhaps like the half a kidney, it went down the hatch. Think, if Mary had that room for some time, and it wasn't a day room, did she know her killer? Was the rent due? Why take someone you didn't know into that room when the Ripper was on the loose? If the skull knows, she's not saying. And so, she was the last official victim of the man known as the Ripper. But many feel there were more, as you, dear friend, know. Because you watch cop shows, a killer will often have a shaky start and then grow more proficient as he learns to perfect his MO. So the Ripper would also have changed in small ways that only the 5 could clearly be connected. It could have been as high as 15, but they are for another time. The whodidits. There was a large pool of men and one woman who could have been the killer, but Scotland Yard and amateur detectives have narrowed it to a few on a short list. Your favorite may not be here, and if that's so, don't get mad at me. After all, no one has been able to prove who it was for 133 years. Now, friends, I won't tell you my choice, but you decide and let me know who your pick is on Facebook at Your Candler. The list. Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, Carl Ferdinand Feigenbaum, Aaron Kaminsky, Thomas Hayne Cutbush, Prince Albert Victor, the Duke of Clarence and Avondale, and James Kelly. Dr. Cream was a doctor secretly performing abortions in Canada and the United States, where he was imprisoned in Illinois for poisoning his lover's husband. In 1881, he was confined there until 1891, or was he? Rumor is he paid his way out with a substitute taking his place. Upon his release, he moved to London and took a murder for which he was hung on 15 November 1892. Dr. Cream had final words as the trapdoor was opened. I am Jack the... We'll never know what the rest was. Carl Feigenbaum was a German seaman, believed to have been in England at the time. He moved to the United States and was arrested and executed in New York City on the 27th of April, 1896, for cutting the throat of a Mrs. Juliana Hoff. After his execution, his lawyer, William Sanford Lawton, claimed he had admitted to the hatred of women and a desire to kill and mutilate them. Lawton stated he believed his client was Jack the Ripper. Aaron Kaminsky. Sir Melville Macnaghten named a Polish Jew as a suspect in 1894, and by Chief Donald Swanson as well. Commissioner Sir Robert Anderson wrote that a Polish Jew was the Ripper, but the witnesses were also Jewish and would not testify against a fellow Jew. Kaminsky was admitted to the Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum in 1891. In 2019, a DNA match was found on Catherine Eddowes' shawl between her and Kaminsky. Thomas Cutbush, 1867 to 1903. He was a medical student sent to Lambeth Infirmary in 1891, suffering delusions caused by syphilis. After stabbing a woman in the buttocks and attempting to stab a second, he was declared insane and committed to Broadmoor Hospital, where he remained until his death in 1903. It was believed he was not considered because his uncle was a police officer, protected by Sir Melville Macnaghten. Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale. He was never suspected in the moment. A conspiracy theory believes the royal family, and indeed Masons, killed everyone who knew of the Duke's love child, leading to the legend of Jack the Ripper. James Kelly. Kelly murdered his wife in 1883 by stabbing her in the neck. Deemed insane, he was committed to the Broadmoor Asylum, from which he later escaped in the spring of 1888. After the last of the 5 conical Ripper murders in November of 88, the police searched for him at his home he'd shared with his wife. He was never found, but in 1927, 40 years after his escape, he turned himself into the hands of the Broadmoor Asylum. Kelly died 2 years later of natural causes. Retired NYPD cold case detective Ed Norris conducted a case for the Discovery Channel and gained access to Kelly's Broadmoor file, claiming that he fit the role as Jack the Ripper. Norris believes that James Kelly was also responsible for murders in the United States between 1888 and 1927. And for you now, the woman thought to be Jill, not Jack the Ripper. Mary Piercy was an Englishwoman convicted of killing her husband's lover and child. She was hung for the crime on December 23, 1890. The victim was Phoebe Hogue, her daughter known as Tiggy. Mrs. Hogue's skull was crushed and her throat cut. The head was nearly severed from her body. Oh, you want to know what happened to the child? I shan't tell you. Yes, I will. The child was found later suffocated after Mary was seen pushing the child in her perambulator. That's a stroller. When the cops got to her home, the sight unnerved many. Blood drenched the walls and ceiling. A skirt and apron, as well as hair and blood on a fireplace poker and kitchen knife. When caught, Mary stated she was killing mice. Simply killing mice. Mary was mentioned at the time as a suspect, posing as a midwife who would, after her birth, might very well have had blood-stained clothing on. But others reported that a woman they thought was Mary Kelly had been seen walking in the area that morning wearing clothes they knew she'd owned. This was after the deed was done, leading to the thought that the Ripper was indeed a woman. If there was a baby, maybe she was the midwife. Maybe she was there to kill the love child and her mother. Was Mary Piercy framed to keep her quiet? You decide. So this is just a little touch to wet your whistle, my friends. Now go research it on your own and let the old skull keeper know if you solve it. If you like this and want more, subscribe. And let me hear from you, because darkness is falling. Evil walks the highways and streets around the world, so be good. Stay safe, because the skulls are watching, and your story just might be next. This story has been fictionalized. All facts are true as reported. Byplay has been fictionalized for entertainment purposes only.